stance width, or how wide my feet are at the very beginning of my golf swing. This is something that is seemingly unimportant or is not talked about very much within the world of golf. And that's because people believe on the surface level that it is not that important. Well, today we're going to talk about why it is very important and how it can help your golf game. What we're also going to cover is how I practice stance width. So what type of tools do I use? What kind of things do I look for? And where exactly do I want to go? Hi, I'm Ben. I am a PGA professional, golf coach, and golf club fitter here at this beautiful facility, Smart Golf and Fitness, in the western suburbs of Chicago. And I am also the owner and founder of Vanquish Golf Works and the A-Line Training Aid. Okay, so let me start by answering the question and why you might all be here. Why is stance width important? Why should I care? And how is it going to help me? Well, like I suggested in the beginning, stance width is going to heavily influence what you're able to do as you move through your golf swing. It is a cause to the effect. If I do this with my stance, it will create this effect later on, or it will influence me to do something else in my golf swing later on. So you should care about this, because if you have the proper stance width and if you pay attention and have a good solid foundation to build off of, then the chances are that the rest of your golf swing stands a much better chance at being fundamentally sound and creating that good strike that we're all chasing after. One of the first and most important things to consider when you are measuring yourself up for stance width or picking one out that would be the most important is the question of, is the golf ball on the ground? Well, the reason why that's an important question is because I want to make sure that I can do all of the things that I want to do when the ball is on the ground, and that stance width again is going to have a direct influence on that. So when the ball is on the ground, I'm really going to want to make sure I can hit down and through it with that shaft lean, with my weight slightly in front of it, and I want to make sure that I can hit that ball first and get that ground second. Well, so that stance width is going to, again, heavily influence your ability to do that. And the reason why is because as I change the width of my stance, my goal or my target on where I'm trying to go also changes. So as I widen out my stance, my outside of my ankle is going to effectively move further away from my hip. As I narrow my stance, that outside of my ankle is going to move closer to my hip. And I'm sure you might be asking, okay, well, what does that have to do with anything? Well, ultimately, we move and turn the best when we are standing on top of this leg, on top of that hip, and everything in this is in a straight line just like this. I'm sure you've seen that on tour all the time where they get right on top of that leg and they turn really nice and tall and posted up and everything like that. If I stand on top of this leg like this, that is when my hip, my knee, and my ankle have the most mobility. If I somehow change that, if I put my weight in my toes, I can't really turn and move anymore. If I put my weight too far back, I can't really move anymore. And if I go too far forward, like some of us do, then your knees are again going to bend and break, and then we're also not going to be able to move anymore. So ultimately, this outside of my ankle is an extremely important position, because that again is going to influence and help me turn and rotate the easiest. So now you can sort of see why stance width might be so important. Again, because if I have a narrower stance, then that distance from my hip to the outside of my ankle is actually quite narrow, and I can get into that ever important position much more easily. So as I have a narrower stance, that is going to allow me to turn and twist much more easily from that position. It is also going to, again, make me move laterally a little bit less side to side, and it's going to make it easier, again, for me to get flush up against my wall or against my door frame or whatever you want to call this, where I'm stacked on that side where I can turn and finish and move the easiest. A narrower stance allows me, again, to turn the easiest and to simplify my lateral motion the easiest. That is the simplest version of those couple of things. Doing so is going to be what will allow me to get that strike down and to allow me to flip and to cast and to create a little bit less of that type of motion and impact. If I can get over and if I can turn more easily, then everything through here with my hands and my arms ends up working a little bit better, and it doesn't have to work so hard to move you through the golf swing. Conversely, if I can't turn my hips and move at all, if I'm in a very bad position to turn, if I'm way the heck back here relative to where I move the most efficiently, now I can't turn and I can't move. So again, stance width is extremely important in that because it's going to influence your ability to get to that point where you can turn and you can move. And if I can turn and I can move, then again, I can start doing all of these things with my hands and my arms much more easily. I can create a little bit more power. I can create some of that shaft lean. I can get rid of my flip. I can get rid of my chicken wing. I can get rid of all of that. So again, having the right stance width is going to be very important. So again, let's recap. Narrower will help me turn much more efficiently and easily. It is also going to allow me to move over a little bit less in order to get to my goal of the outside of my ankle. The only negative of having a narrower stance is that it is going to be a little less stable and ultimately a little less powerful. And the reason why that is because my feet are closer together. I just don't have that lateral stability anymore. If someone was going to push me from one side to the next, I would become off balance more quickly. Also, having a wider stance is going to allow me to move and shift my weight around a little bit easier, create more momentum, and then therefore some more power. So leading very quickly into that, a little bit of foreshadowing on why wider might be more helpful. Wider is something that we're probably going to want to do when we have a longer golf club in my hands, especially a driver. If the ball is on a tee, I can go wider more easily. And again, wider is pretty much the exact opposite of narrow in terms of what it's going to allow me to do. Wider is going to restrict my ability to turn my hips, but it will also let me move side to side a little bit more than I would have been able to otherwise. I can move further side to side and still stay in balance relative to something that's narrower. So something that you're not going to hit quite as hard is going to be great for a narrower stance. An iron, a ball on the ground, a chip and a pitch, that type of shot. If I get a longer and bigger golf club, like a driver or fairway wood, I will progressively widen my stance to allow me to get a little bit more speed and more momentum and create a little bit more of that force. Conversely, that negative of having that wider stance, of being out here, is again, my hip is now further away from my ankle. And so because that hip is further away from my ankle, I'm gonna have to move more laterally and further before I can get to that point where I turn and move the easiest. If I have to move more laterally, that is going to delay the timing and the action of my hip rotation. And ultimately for you, what's probably going to be the most important is that will keep your club path slightly more into, out, or to the right if you're a right-handed golfer. So as I get more narrow, that tends to make my path more left and more over the top or negative if you're thinking TrackMan. And if I make it more right, that's going to tend to help me keep myself a little bit more closed and help me draw the ball a little bit more. So how do I practice this? Stance width is something that I practice with my tool that I invented, A-Line. A-Line is something that I created because of all of these things. because I've been coaching and I've been seeing all these issues that people have been having and things at the beginning of their golf swing that they overlook, I created a tool that helps you do this as simply and as easily as possible. So I use my A-line and I set it up on the ground with my left foot on the left side of the stick right here, and then my right foot on the left side of the stick as well. And this is going to allow me to then swing and move a little bit more easily as compared to maybe outside and outside. I might kind of hit and kick that thing a little bit more. So I'm going to use my A-line. I'm going to take these bits here and I'm going to adjust them to make sure that the width is correct. And so what I'm looking for is these numbers on this particular A-line. And so what I have it set up on is 12 and 27. And so if I have it set up on 12 and 27, and I put that golf ball right in the middle on that bit right there, and I just put my feet in there, they don't have to be slammed up against it, but if they get pretty close, we're happy. And then all I gotta do is just use that tool and it will measure my stance width for me. I just need to pay attention to this and just make sure that my stance is, relatively speaking, close to the tools and the references that I have created for myself. And then if I've got that narrower stance, well then I can go ahead and I can hit my shot and I can be consistent and I can do the same thing over and over and over and over and over. And ultimately that is one of the single most important things when it comes to this whole thing, is consistency. So I would set up my A-line and I'm going to manipulate my A-line to help me move and practice. Okay, so just like I promised, let's talk really quick about my recommendations for the width. As I mentioned previously, with a ball on the ground, I would prefer my stance to be a little bit narrower. Well, how narrow, or what should it really look like, and what is this really going to move around like? So this is a 7-iron that I have in my hand, and if I have a 7-iron, what I'm looking for again is I've got 12 and 27 on my A-line, and I'm going to put my feet roughly in those marks, and what that's going to give me is a roughly shoulder width and hip width stance, kind of halfway between shoulder width and hip width. And so what that is going to help me do is that is going to help me sway and slide a little bit less, and again preference my rotation. So if I have any sort of iron, I'm going to use a hip width stance. So now I've got a wedge in my hand, and the type of shot that I'm going to be hitting is more of a pitch or chip type of a shot. And so what I've done now is I've readjusted my A-line and I have put my numbers on 12 and 23. Again, using this white piece, the connector in between, as my ball position guide. And so if I've got that ball position right off that middle connector and I put my feet in there at 12 and 23, what that is going to do is that's going to narrow my stance even more. Well, that is a preferable position because, again, I'm hitting a pitch or a chip. And that is different because when I hit a pitch or a chip, I'm really not looking for all kinds of speed and power. But what I am looking for is a very consistent club face. And so I'm going to narrow in even more to allow myself to move and turn even a little bit easier. It's going to slightly restrict my hip turn going backwards, and it's also going to really restrict how much I'm going to sway and slide. And so if I'm going to be hitting this 40 or 50 yard shot, I don't really need all of that momentum going laterally side to side. So I'm going to narrow my stance and restrict my ability to do that, and I'm going to preference my ability to turn and rotate and to keep that club face stable instead. So again, I've got myself at 12 and 23, and as far as the actual width is concerned, I am narrower than my shoulders and just, very, very narrow relative to everything else, but about hip width. Very narrow compared to what you would do on a full shot or especially with a driver. So hip width, 12 and 23, preferencing the rotation here, and then what that's going to do is allow me to then turn and move turn my legs off a little bit more, preference that rotation, don't really need any sort of lateral motion, and I can really simplify my golf swing and strike it a little bit more consistently when I really don't need that power. Okay, so last but not least, let's talk about driver and metalwoods, anything that you put up on a tee. So the width of my stance for those is going to be significantly wider than the little chip shot we just talked about, but also maybe about a foot wider than the ball being on the ground. And so what that's going to look like is slightly wider than the width of your shoulders. And again, I am going to very much be preferencing my ability to move laterally side to side so I can create more speed and more power, but that's also going to allow me to move more laterally, get behind the golf ball and hit from behind the golf ball more into out, a little bit more of a draw type of a shape, and hit upward a little bit more. So the wider I get, the more I can move side to side, the more stability I have, the more momentum I can create, the more I can swing into out, and the more I can hit up on the ball. All of those things are really good because they preference distance and speed. And when I'm hitting a driver, that is my preference, is distance and speed. Conversely, having the width be too wide then really negates my ability to turn and rotate. So I have to be careful and have that boundary, which again is why I only want my stance to be ever so slightly wider than my shoulders. I don't really want it to be way out here because now I have no, I can't turn and rotate. And the only thing I'm gonna wanna do is move like this, like I'm like skating almost. So I don't really want to do all of that in as much as possible. So I'm only going to go ever so slightly wider than the width of my shoulders. Again, for all of those speed and power reasons. So on my A line, I've now got this extra piece set up, the telescopic piece. I'm putting my golf ball out in front of that. You'll notice that it is actually in front of this left reference. And so I've got this extended out and on number 6. My foot is on number 8 and my back foot is on 30. So if I set up like that and if I use that as a guidepost, then that is going to again allow me to start a little bit wider and a little bit more behind the golf ball, which again is going to preference speed and power. Thanks so much for going on this journey with me and learning about the importance of the fundamentals of setup and alignment, specifically stance width. I'm going to do a little bit of a series about setup and alignment. Again, I created a setup and alignment training tool for this purpose because I see this problem so often when I coach and throughout my golfing career. So if you want to go ahead and check out the A-line, this guy right here, I would very much appreciate it. Again, this is what I believe the ultimate setup and alignment training tool. It's only 99 bucks. It does all of what we did today, plus way more, and it is going to allow you to become as consistent as possible as long as you just use the numbers and let it guide you and sort of help steer you into the right positions. So you can find A-line on my website at vanquishgolfworks.com, and it is available right now, and you can ship anywhere within the United States. Thanks so much again for checking out this video. If you really liked this video, I would very much appreciate it if you would share it with someone. I have a small channel and I'm trying to grow it, but at the same time, it is very encouraging to have you guys provide some feedback for me, but also really, really cool when I know that I'm helping you. And again, if you find someone that you think could benefit from this, go ahead and share it with them. What we're ultimately striving for is to become smarter golfers and better golfers. And I would say that if you know a little bit more about the fundamentals and the setup and the aim and the alignment, well, then you're probably going to have a really good chance of being a smarter and better golfer. And if you're a smarter and better golfer, you're probably going to be a happier golfer too. So happier golfers is what we all like to be. And ultimately, if you have a better understanding of what you're doing, you're going to play better golf and be a happier person. So go ahead and share that with someone. And until next time, see you later.